rational reconstructions of the particular practices of the community. So the idea is that the view is not, it's not a transcendent view. The view is a way of thinking about what are the ways that we actually engage in our practices. What are the intuitions that we have operative when we engage in those practices? And can we articulate a kind of coherent and systematic way of thinking about what that practice is, what those social roles are? Those of you, familiar with the work of John Rawls, and Dewey, for instance, know of this kind of strategy. And so the idea is that articulate a coherent and consistent account of the practice, and then that practice can serve as a set of ideals or rules that become standards of the correct practice and can serve as a basis of social coordination. So just to give you an example of how reconstructions work, you can think of some ways in which we routinely do this. Grammar, right? I mean, in some sense, there's no, you might like to think there's no, unless you're Chomsky, right? There's no Platonic essence to correct grammar. Grammar is a reconstruction of the way we actually speak as a community, and it establishes rules that allow us to coordinate our language use. If we get a little bit ethically richer, we might think about common law, right? These countries that have common law system, precedent cases, and reasoning of those cases are used by judges to arrive at formal principles of the common law. And then finally, someone like Rawls, you might read Rawls as taking the intuitions of our democratic common sense, number R, right? So it'll be within our particular community, and formalizes them into ideals, and then these ideals are then metaphorically, Rawls's word actually, metaphorically represented in something like the original position. And so the idea is that we could still maybe have things like idealizations, but the idealizations would have to be rooted in the rational reconstruction of our practices. The principles that emerge from these rational reconstructions, in our view, would be very useful. And one of the things that they're going to be useful for is in what we're calling ethical deliberation. Deliberation is an action-oriented exchange of reasons that aims at preserving trust and cooperation. And so the distinction that we have in mind here would be the distinction between deliberation and discourse. Discourse would be an exchange of reasons oriented towards consensus. Deliberation is more pragmatic, so it's a little bit of a step down in that sense. We're not aiming necessarily for consensus, though that would be the ideal outcome, but we're aiming for maintenance of trust and cooperation. In some sense, the losers of the deliberation, what we're shooting for is that if we take action in which there are winners and losers, the losers can at least see the reasonability of why we acted this way, and therefore can continue to maintain trust and social cooperation with us. This is a slide that Stephanie added last night. I don't know what it means. Idealizations of social, I'm sorry, Stephanie, do you want to, okay. So idealizations, so these idealizations, as we're engaging in these deliberations, these idealizations of social roles can provide important material by which agents avoid or at least dampen the alienation as they engage in cooperative actions with others. So to summarize the argument so far, because I'm a little bit over, but I've got lots of time now, right? Kristen's saying, no, you know. Okay, so the argument so far, that just to summarize, I know I've been zipping through a lot. There is no pure moral perspective. So the traditional moral perspective as a kind of transcendent perspective, as a view from nowhere, we reject that view. Our obligations, therefore, are contextual and relational. Rational reconstructions of our social roles play an important part in understanding and justifying our ethical obligations. The rules, ideals, and principles of such rational reconstructions can serve as an important resource in ethical deliberation. So, to finish up, let me go back to Boethius and kind of tell you what we would advise Boethius, maybe. And so, first, following Aristotle, ethics is not a black and white application of abstract principles, right? I mean, so it's not, ethics is not mathematics. And in some sense, we agree with people like Virginia Held and Roger Ames that in some sense, this is where modern ethical theory's gone wrong. And understandably wrong in our effort to deal with cultural pluralism and our effort to deal with the religious wars of the 17th century. You can see why both Bentham and Kant, in very similar time periods, are motivated to make ethics more mathematical and logically oriented. But we think this is ultimately a mistake. Ethics is not an application of principles. It is a way. Sorry, Roger. So it's messy, it takes time, and more thought than you would expect. It may be painful. Remember, this is advice for Boethius, right? The reward for taking this way is integrity, trust, social cooperation, healthy community, strong relations, excellence, love, and respect. In other words, good things, as both like Scanlon and Williams would say, right? These are good reasons for action, right? I mean, these would be good reasons for action. And in one of my favorite lines from Bernard Williams, he takes one of these trolley type problems where he thinks, if you see two people drowning in a lake and one of them is your wife, and you need to ethically calculate why you jumped in, then you've had one thought too many, right? I mean, it's like that, the love and respect in relationships, it should be enough, and you don't really need to be doing that kind of calculation. And so we would leave Boethius with two ways of thinking about how to operationalize our view. One, honor your relationships. And here our view is going to be get outside your head and deliberate. So Kantianism and utilitarianism, at least traditionally presented, are monological theories, or things that I sort of do in our head. So again, we're making a return back to Aristotle in the role of deliberation, but intersubjective deliberation, right? So don't be monological, be dialogical. For Boethius, deliberate with that client, right? See what course of action the client would find appropriate. Imagine, perhaps by proxy deliberation, what such a witness might find appropriate. Remember, you can't forget that relationship too, right? That's the relationship too that Boethius will have with the witness he's about to impeach. Otherwise, at least imagine how you would feel, emphasis on the feel, if you had to face this witness after, let's say, impeaching her and humiliating her, and had to explain your course of action, right? Again, if just the thought of that, and notice in a lot of these kind of cases, that rarely even comes up as a consideration, right? Usually it's, well, I've got basic rights and duties, they indemnify me in a certain way, then I can do things, and I don't have to apologize, or I don't have to face this person again. But in real life, you should think about it that way, right? You have this relationship, how would you feel deliberating with this person that you're thinking about acting towards in this way? How would you feel explaining your actions to the jury, right? The people that, in some degree, you did try to deceive, right? How would you feel trying to, what would you say to them? What kind of reasons do you think would be convincing to them? How about the judge? How about your peers? Our second piece of advice is honor your role. Your reasoning should fit with the best reconstruction of your role and should promote the good that comes from that role. Deliberate with your fellow professionals in an effort to find a general sense of appropriateness in this case. So again, in any kind of ethics that's done this way, sadly what we do not end with is, Boethius, this is what you should do in terms of impeach or not impeach. On this view, that is not actually how ethics works, and it's been a mistake on the part of particularly contemporary ethics to think that that is the way it can happen. So finally, some warnings. No justification is absolute, so proceed cautiously and with moral humility. Every case is different, so deliberation continues. And then finally, don't beat yourself up. If you're following our advice, you are a person of good faith who is truly trying to do what is best, and there is honor in that alone. Thank you.